everyone, and welcome to another episode of FooBar. In today's episode, we are going to talk about how to standardize serverless practices in organizations. If you want to know more about serverless, cloud computing, or software engineer practices in general, subscribe to my channel in the red button below. I post videos on Tuesdays and on Thursdays, so let's get started! Another episode in my series This Is Not a Podcast, and today I have a really amazing guest, Nicole Yip. She's a Lego platform manager, so she's been working with serverless for a while and trying to standardize some process in the organization to try to standardize serverless services. And this is a very interesting talk because I think one of the things that we cover in this talk a lot is how Ops is extremely valuable for serverless. I want to demystify that myth. So let's get to my talk with Nicole. Hello and welcome to another episode. Today I have an amazing guest. She's called Nicole Yip. She's an engineer manager at Lego, one of my favorite companies in the world because I'm a super fan of those toys. I just cannot get enough of it, and they are my best reference whenever I talk about serverless. Use Lego blocks. So it's always good to know that they are a serverless company as well. So welcome, Nicole. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a great privilege and opportunity to join your channel.
Yeah, I'm super happy that you accepted because I was following you around and you've been giving a lot of chats and different talks about serverless, and I like your take and your experience and everything that you have been building around. Why you don't tell the audience a little bit about you? What is your journey in the serverless world and also inside Lego?
Cool. As Marcia said, I'm Nicole, and I've been in, I guess, the AWS world for over 4 or 5 years now. Started back in Australia, actually, where I started my, I guess, IT career. That was my first experience with running a production workload in AWS. It was for an internal application. And since then, I've moved to the UK for the Lego group and really been standing on the shoulders of giants. They've done all the heavy lifting of getting their monolith into serverless. So that's with Sheen Bristles, Alvaro Martinez, Yamoha at the helm. And they had already gotten most of the serverless services written to get us to that point where we could be running the lego.com website as serverless. And then I've just come in and I guess tried to pull them along in terms of getting SRE and operations and stability and all of that.
But you're one of the examples that serverless still has ops.
For sure, yes.
Because that's one of the big myths when people talk about serverless. It's like no ops. Yes, there are ops in serverless.
For sure. I mean, I'm in the platform team and in the team at Lego, and we're constantly facing that existential crisis of what do we actually do? And it's that thing of there actually is some ops there. There is ops in DevOps, and also there's that coaching element of you're taking developers who have come across from the Java or the front end space, and now you're showing them a little bit more about how code is hosted and that infrastructure side, but they still need to understand and learn a bit more about the important parts of operations. So observability, security, all of that good stuff. And I guess a bit of context is I'm in what we call the DST team, so Direct Shopper Technology. And so we look after the website for lego.com. Anywhere that you're browsing for products, adding to bag, redeeming your rewards points, that's what my team looks after. So the way
Christmas
that Lego
is a fun time for you.
Yeah, Christmas is a great time. Just for context, that the Lego group is broken up into lots of different departments, and we're given a lot of freedom to run in lots of different directions. It's always important for us to specify that we look after the website, but there are other teams using other technology stacks as well in different parts of the company.
Exactly. But I think what you're going to share about with us today is a lot of this coaching and mentoring, and how the platform team is really enabling other teams to go serverless. And I think that's a very important part of the like myth of there is no ops in serverless, because we are empowering developers with a lot of these operational things that before it was really on the side of ops. But I think you will talk a little bit about what you're showing developers, and also how ops is really doing a lot of work as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
I hope we can demystify that today. And if somebody tells you there is no ops in serverless, you can put the link to this talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Yes.
guess looking back over some of the talks that I've done and reflecting on, I've only been in the team for a year and a half now. So um, the main things that I've been targeting since I've started was looking back on how do we do DevOps, and seeing how we can build up that culture within the engineers. And then as that started taking off, we started looking at, so how do we operate our services? And so that kind of forms the journey I've taken in that year and a half.
Yeah. Did you learn serverless for the first time when you joined this team, or you were already working in the serverless space before?
I came from a very, I guess, infrastructure and hosting background. So I had used serverless to do standard automation things, so rotating images, deleting old snapshots, and then joining this team in the Lego group, really using serverless in anger was a big change for me. Also a global public website where you can't use the normal security things of putting a network ACL around your system and knowing that it's only going to be used internally. Throwing all of that out the window and trying to figure out the best security practices in this space was a massive challenge, and I learned so much so quickly.
Yeah, and I think that also helps you to empathize with the people that you're coaching, to understand where they're coming from, and help them to guide them in the journey, because that sometimes people think like you need to be an expert to coach, and no, sometimes being closer to where the people are, you can always learn in the journey, but having that empathy is very, very important to understand where people are coming from, and they listen to you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the story of the adoption of Lego with serverless, and what is happening today, and how you're trying to keep on with the serverless world.
Yeah, so back in 2018, before I started with the company, they wrote their first serverless service back at the end of 2018, and that was the pilot, or the POC, or the MVP, to really get the business on board of showing them the power of serverless, and showing them that you don't have to go through the pain of going through yearly update cycles that take a whole year to complete. You can take one piece of functionality and have it released really, really quickly, daily, hourly, however you like. And after that took off, so after that one service really got adopted into production, we wrote around 20 other services that really took over all of the functionality of our existing on-premise monolith. And
Wow.
yeah, we took the plunge. We did a big bang release in July last year. And that's when we flicked the switch. Shop.lego.com became serverless. We didn't have any on-premise connection aside from through a Lambda function. So yeah, that was a massive win for us. We then became the homepage for Lego.com a month later, and so that drove a lot more traffic through our stack. And yeah, that whole 10-month journey was about building functionality, making sure that once we went live, we could actually do exactly the same processing that we were doing before.
What were like the biggest challenges in that migration that it's still like you look back and you say, oh man?
I mean, I wasn't here for most of it, but from what I hear, it was the time pressures. It was really focusing on functionality and building a solid product that would stand up to a lot of traffic immediately. So Lambda did a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So, it scales automatically. It will scale no matter, per request, essentially. And so it was upskilling or like getting the developers into that serverless mindset that Sheen talks about a lot. And he did a lot of that heavy lifting of coaching the engineers to think serverless, design serverless. And then once we had written these services that were functional, that's when I joined, and we started taking that other lens of what does DevOps mean? What do engineers need to be aware of? That they were building all of this functionality. Now they need to start thinking about observability and all of that good stuff. And then moving on again into the standard of what a good service looks like, because obviously when you're trying to build so quickly and you've got so many developers, they're going to have their own take on how you build a good service. And so once we had been through that mad rush of going completely serverless, we could then try and standardize and say, this is what we think a good service is. And that's where we are today.
Have you defined already then what is a good service?
Let's say we've got version 0.1. So it's very much in draft. It's very much just a collection of thoughts and practices, and that come both from the infrastructure world and from what the developers have already discovered as good practices and have proven out. Because every time we write a new service, we try out a new thing, or we look at what's best practice at the time and we bring that in as well. So the developers themselves have already discovered what good things are to include in services, and then we've just kind of documented all that. We've added on some other operations type stuff, and that's formed our version 0.1 of our standard.
Can you give me some headlines of good practices that every service should have?
Yeah, so I guess we started with DevOps and all of that. So the thing that made sense was to look at how we release. So one of our guidelines around deployment mechanism is all services should use canary deployments. So using the built-in code deploy and traffic shifting models to roll out a service so that if certain alarms start triggering, it rolls back automatically. So just having that safety net when you're releasing into production, especially if it's a key service that's receiving a lot of traffic, you've got that automatic rollback.
And it's so easy to set up the canary deployment. So
yeah, and we're using the serverless framework. So you add a plugin, you configure your alarms, and you're set.
Yeah, so you use that a lot. That's great to hear, because I love canary deployments, but I don't do production code anymore. So.
Hey, in any site that sees public traffic, so if you've got a CV site or anything like that, the public can access it, you can put canary on it.
Exactly, and then you have like 10% of your traffic for, I don't know, many minutes, hours, and then whenever everything is good, then you start putting all your traffic there. So that's pretty cool. What else you have there in the good services?
So something else that's related to canary is alerting guidelines. So we've set as a minimum that all Lambda functions should have an alert on whenever an error is sent, so X number of errors or throttles. So that's just giving us a good baseline of if something starts erroring that wasn't erroring before, someone is notified about it. Also, we've got standards around API gateway. So if we start getting spikes in 400 or 500 errors from API gateway, we'll get an alert as well. So just setting in those standards where, you might be putting in a Lambda function or putting in an API gateway, but you won't necessarily think about alerting someone when something starts going wrong. Yeah. You'll log out the error because when you're in a development mindset, I'll log out the error and I'll find it later. But yeah, from the operations point of view, we want to be reactive, as soon as possible. We want to know when something's going wrong. So we added in some guidelines around there as well.
So basically, when developers are coding, they are already thinking about these alerts. And do you use some kind of library, or everybody's deciding how to write the alerts in their own way?
So there is a plugin that's created by A Cloud Guru that we use. We've also wrapped that we've created our own plugin for API gateway alerts as well that builds on top of that and sets some defaults. So yeah, for the Lambda functions, errors, and throttles, that already comes out of the A Cloud Guru plugin. Nice. For API gateway alerts, we've written our own plugin to wrap around that and have some defaults for 400 and 500 errors thresholds that make sense for us. And I think there's also like a not invoked alert as well that developers can add in if they want. And it's just giving them I guess it's about demystifying the unknown unknowns. So if you say to a developer, put in alerts, we can say, okay, go look at this plugin and that plugin, have a look at the defaults, and then they can start thinking, does that make sense to me? Do I need to tune that? Or even if they just put it in using the defaults and they start getting alerted, that's a trigger to say, okay, too much noise, I need to get rid of that. So yeah, it's really about demystifying it and saying, here's a good default, adapt it to your use case, because every single Lambda function has a different profile. It's for a different use case. So that's been our approach to rolling out some of these standards.
And do you get to test these, for example, alerting in staging, or you are the ones that test all in production?
No. To start with, we were only enabling alerts in production, and that led to, we had a couple issues where the deployment pipeline would just roll it back, or it would start alerting, or you would get a serverless, like a reference error, because maybe you've misconfigured the name of the alarm wrong. So now part of the guidelines that we've updated is that you have alerts enabled in every single stage, from dev, which is their local stage or like the playground environment, all the way up to production, because it means that you catch all of those reference errors. It means that you also can tune. So not only do you tune to production traffic, but you can check that your alert actually goes off.
Exactly.
Because one of the things you don't always test, it's just like unit testing. If you put in a test that's always passing, do you know it actually fails? Just like an alert. If it's tuned for production traffic and you cause an issue that it will definitely alert, at least you know the alert works.
Exactly, yeah. That's something I noticed in my previous life. That's what I was asking, because we were very stupid and we tested everything in production. We didn't test it. We didn't test it in staging, let's put it like that. And then we were suffering a lot with our observability in general. We had so many problems there. So it's just like a good practice to test everything in staging, because, as you say, you never know if it will turn on.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you using like integration tests to test those alarms, or you're just triggering, like developers are triggering? Do you have some kind of good standard or integration tests?
So we don't have integration tests around the alerts specifically, but our dev environment has constant testing going on. So I think it's every 1 hour we run browser tests. And so we hit a bunch of standard routes in lots of different browsers, and that generates traffic to our backend services. So that helps in testing out the alerts. Also, we've connected all of our alerts up to our Teams channel. So we have one called Echo Chamber and one called AWS. So as you might be able to tell, Echo Chamber is just to throw the noise in from all of the lower environments. So if a developer is tuning an alert, they can be triggering it in dev or acceptance, and it will go to Teams and they can verify it themselves.
Nice.
But yeah, at the moment it's up to the developer that's implementing the alert to test it out.
Yeah, but it's good that you have the good practice there, so people can see it. And what else you have in your? I think observability is always a big thing for these things.
Yeah, for sure. So we use New Relic for observability. We've already been using it for our front-end applications. So we use the APM service, for example. But they've since introduced distributed tracing, and they've also got logging. So we're going all in on their platform. And so part of our standard was to implement the New Relic Lambda layer, so that we're sending metrics through and also subscribing so that all of the logs go through to New Relic. So the idea being that if we need to debug or find out what's going on with our system, there's only one application you need to go to. The AWS console is always a good backup, because there's a 5 to 10 minute delay on information coming through to New Relic. So yeah, we use both New Relic if we can spare the time, or we go to AWS if we need to know something immediately.
Exactly, if something is burning. But I think it's a good practice to have all your logs and metrics and everything you can centralized, because then it's very hard. If not, you have to pull 27 dashboards, and if there is an error in production, then it will be very, very painful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that you have been doing is using the well-architected and the serverless lens quite a lot.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. So let me share this. So this is a slide from a talk that I did with Hannah Tucker McClellan a couple of weeks ago, actually. And we were talking through how we introduced the standard for building serverless services and how that compared with the AWS serverless lens. And we found that the AWS serverless lens actually helped fill in a couple gaps of, you know how I said that our standards was version 0.1. It's because it was just a collection of what we thought from an operations perspective and the best practices from a development perspective. And then you can see that there's a couple gaps here in reliability and performance where we haven't set guidelines, but we have got good practices and patterns in place already. So we hadn't had to explicitly define them in the standard. So yeah, you can see that on the left-hand side, we've got operational excellency, security, reliability, performance, and cost optimization. Those are the 5 pillars from AWS. And then on the right-hand side is our focus areas. So we had 8 focus areas in our serverless standard. So I've already talked through alerting, observability, the deployment mechanism. But there are a couple more there. And you can see that they're kind of distributed across the operations side, mostly in the operational excellency pillar. And then going through to the coding side or the development side, where we're talking about how you store your secrets, whether we use middleware and things like that.
Yeah, but that's very, very good that you can map these two things, because at least the serverless lens is built on the experience of many companies, including Lego, I imagine, because you're one of the very early adopters of serverless in really high scale. So this is all built by listening to customers and understanding how customers are doing things. So there's just a collection of best practices and things you have in mind, and it's really nice that you make the match together.
Yeah, well, it really helped us in terms of validating that our approach was going along the right lines. So because the AWS serverless lens is there as a general guide of, have you thought about these things? And then our service audit or service standard is, this is how we do these things. So we've really personalized it and made it concrete for developers to say, this is how we do these things. And this map kind of shows how, yes, we have thought about all of those different areas that AWS recommends. And we're essentially standing on the shoulders of even more giants because of the consolidation work that AWS has already done.
Yeah, but that's pretty interesting. And also the well-architected is a journey. It's not like you need to have it like all the ticks in the boxes, because I think it's impossible. We keep on adding new things in there. but I think it's a great map to know where you are standing and where you need to improve, as you say, maybe reliability and performance, or things that maybe you didn't give an importance in the past, but now, as you have covered the other areas so well, then maybe something to think in the future, or to start building focus areas on there if you think that's something that is concerning for you.
Yeah, exactly. And it helps build out our roadmap as well, because now we can say, okay, let's go over and review what is our standard pattern for reliability and all of those areas of the serverless lens. And then we can explicitly say, that was something we built in that 10-month period that it was okay for now, but let's really tighten that up and go through a process of tuning all of our services, for example. So yeah, we found that the serverless lens was really good for this. And while we're not going to, I guess, address these gaps right away, we're going to focus on getting that serverless standard 0.1 out and adopted by the whole team. And then we'll come back and, yeah, I guess as a platform squad, we'll be going through and filling in these gaps and then rolling it out to the squads again. Yeah. But yeah, one of the main emphasis points of the talk that Hannah and I did was, it's going to be the engineers that own it. It was started by the platform squad, but it's going to be the engineers that own it, because we want to build them into serverless engineers. As I said, they've all come from front end or Java backgrounds. So giving them that extra I guess, facet to their expertise is what we're trying to build as being part of our team. So, yeah.
And the question here is like how you're handling this. It's like something that is centralized. You mentioned standards, so basically you're just giving like these tools to the developers, or you're having it, I don't know, some kind of tool or something that you are managing. How you're planning to roll this out.
That's part of the reason why it's version 0.1. It's at the moment it's this massive table in Confluence, which is very unwieldy, very manual, not being kept up to date. Well, partially being kept up to date because it's linked in with Jira, but we want to improve that. What we're aiming to do in terms of rolling it out to the squads is we're going to look at this last point of exploring gamification. So we want to explore squad level dashboards where a squad can go somewhere central, and they'll have links to all of the services they own, all of the documentation for their services. They can deploy their services from there and know what version is in production. But also, they'll have a score of what the serverless standard is for that service and what parts they need to improve on or implement, and just help them keep front of mind where their service is in terms of how easy is it to operate, how easy is it to debug issues, and also is it following the best practices that we have for coding standards even. And as part of the talk, I also said we could create a leaderboard, which would be really fun. But it's all about, if you get engineers excited about this, which is very hard to do, you're talking about standards, you're talking about coding standards, how do you make that fun? But any level of competition or anything will help for them really own this standard, and also help. They've already started contributing back to the standard, which is amazing, and we want to continue building on that. So if we bring it in front of them even more and say they can call out things like, oh, actually that standard doesn't make sense anymore because this new feature was released, which I think is going to happen at re:Invent and
it always happens.
Future. Yeah. So keeping those scores up to date, and having a leaderboard, having some pride on the line, that's going to encourage them to be, contribute back to the standard more. So that's my master plan.
This is really cool, because I think this is a really great view on how the ops team can really empower developers and give them tools in order to be able to manage their observability, their deployments, documentation, all these things that usually was coming in the shoulders of ops. And I think it's really aligned to, first, the DevOps culture that is bringing ops and the kind of developers together, and also to the serverless mindset that we try to empower people, and there is a lot of things that you are not have to build, because now all these things became easier and self-managed, but everybody can build their own service and don't need to interact with each other. But at the same time, ops still have control on the standards and on the main platform where everything runs, because you're still there.
Yeah. So I mean, we can, because the main thing about, I think I mentioned this before, where the platform team is having this existential crisis of what do we actually do? What do we own? What can we influence? And it's really this. It's about coaching the engineers to say, what do you need to be aware of to make this easier to operate, to make this easier to be more reliable? And then it's about empowering them and saying, do you have enough environments where you can test certain things? Do you have enough flexibility on your pipeline so you can test edge cases, so you don't have to go and rewrite a pipeline just to add an extra stage, for example? So it's about those kinds of things. I guess a peek into things that we want to also look at in the platform team are things like, chaos engineering. Can we enable squads to take out an entire third party from 5 different Lambda functions at once?
That's your reliability
exactly
pillar.
The tick. Yeah. So that's something further down the line that we definitely want to explore. But that's what the platform team is for. We're not here to impose standards. We're not here to impose things or even be responsible for those things. Although I guess ultimately we are. But it's about coaching the engineers to be able to take that on, to understand it, to not be afraid of all of this extra responsibility, but we can guide them and say, if you do these things, then you can do this, and it's so much easier. You only have to go to one place to see what's happening in your platform.
Exactly, because again, you're building these services that are, or things that are helping developers to do their work faster, and also you're because you're giving that power to developers, you have more free time to work on things that are meaningful, like chaos engineering or exploring new things. So it's like a whole like snowball of goodness that is coming from empowering everybody. It's not like, oh, you're giving your shop to developers, so now ops doesn't have any work. No, there is so much work to do.
Yeah, I mean the serverless space, the IT space, the operations and cloud space, that's constantly evolving. So
exactly.
Yeah, like we're looking at what's happening in chaos engineering, looking at what's happening in how we can improve developer experience, and things like what Vercel and Next are doing in terms of having environments spinning up with a command line command, and there's so much more we can do around PR automation, for example. So there's a lot out there that we want to tackle, and it's like, what do we do first? It's all so exciting.
But I think this is a great inspirational talk for all these ops people that are afraid of serverless.
You still matter. You're still needed.
Exactly. Don't worry. You're still needed, and I think the light ahead is even more fun than whatever you were doing in the past. I don't know. Maybe you can say it better, but how you've been feeling this journey of.
So, I mean, I've only been in the cloud space for about 4 or 5 years, right? So
that's quite a long time for this work.
Yeah, I suppose.
You're an old person in the cloud ages.
Yeah, so I guess my view on it is that I haven't come from a place where I've had to manage on something on premise. I haven't come from a place
to move tapes around.
Yeah, exactly. So I've already I don't have a perspective from anyone coming from that background, but coming into it from straight into cloud, straight from kind of a development background in uni, it's super exciting, and it's about finding those other perspectives that developers won't have considered, or that is not core to a development workflow. So when you're learning how to code, you go through a software development life cycles, right? So you're doing test-driven development, you're writing tests, writing code, making sure it functions correctly. And then it's about figuring out how you can expand their view of what they're building. So not only do they have to write the code and make it function, make the test pass, can you debug it easily? Are you notified when something goes wrong? Do they know what the alerting platform looks like? That's one thing that not many developers know, but if they know exactly how an alert goes from the thing that's hosting their code to an engineer that's on call, or even into their own team where they're posting daily, that's super, super powerful, because then engineers are very creative. They'll say that they're not, but engineers are very, very creative. You'll get all sorts of suggestions and comments, and developers love to automate things. So the minute you lift the veil on what's happening behind the scenes, they'll be like, can it do this? Can it do that? Like in my previous role, we built a chatbot where we were using EC2 instances, so every time it ran out of memory, a developer could interact with this chatbot and restart the server. And then we got the question of, can it send random GIFs? Can it spin up the server after hours so that I can continue working? So you get all sorts of these, extensions to anything that you build, anything that you give the developers a peek into. They'll be coming back with suggestions. So yeah, I think it's all about lifting that veil, showing them what's going on, taking and being open to the suggestions, because that's the other thing. Like, if a developer doesn't feel empowered, or if they don't see the point in giving feedback, then you've already lost. And that's not what you want from a DevOps team. So
so I think you're really touching all the core of the DevOps culture, making a safe space, making collaboration, and making everything transparent, and that's very also close to the serverless mindset, because if you want to have everybody working on things that are meaningful and not work on the heavy lifting, then you need to have a safe space with feedback, and and people are building things that are meaningful and they feel empowered to say, no, this is bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a big credit to the engineering culture that has been built in my team as well. Because yes, there was a really high pressure situation for 10 months. We had to build this thing and get it out the door. But now we've been able to take a breath, we've been able to look at what we've built, see how we operate it, and then have that time to really go back and revisit, let's make what we built better. And the fact that we've been given that time, that it's acknowledged by management, and also the developers themselves are seeing the value in it. They're focusing not only on building brand new features, but they're also going, oh, but this operations thing's kind of cool. It's also giving it a new twist to the service that they built a couple months ago. So,
Nice.
yeah.
That's really nice to hear. And I think sometimes it's not about putting out features, it's making services that work better. And I don't know, an e-commerce, I imagine there's a million things you can add, but if you have a core that is slow and it's not performing well, then it doesn't matter what kind of bells and whistles you put in your application. And the same applies to everything. If your core is not good and polished, then it doesn't matter how many features you add. So that's cool that you have the time to invest in your core and make it the best service you can. And then, because I imagine this migration, you also now have a little bit modular service that services that people can play with more safety, not to, because I've been working in monolith, and every time you touch something, you're praying to all the gods.
Yes, for sure. And I mean, like I said, when we started building services, we didn't have any standards or practices or patterns to follow. So we've ended up with these really old services that are mini monoliths. And so again, it's terrifying for any developer to venture in there, and maybe they need to add one new feature, but you kind of roll the dice when you deploy it. So again, we're going through that process of breaking down our mini monoliths into microservices. So
do you have some definition on what is a microservice for Lego?
I don't think we've agreed on our definition, actually. We have the concept of services, which is a collection of resources that do a single thing. And then it's that definition of what is a single thing we haven't delved into further.
Yeah. So basically a service is a collection of microservices.
Or
a collection.
It depends on your definition of microservice.
I don't know, right? I'm asking you because you said
Yeah, so for us, a service is a collection of resources that do a thing, a single thing.
A single thing. So for example, that would be like, I don't know, just saying a CloudFormation stack of AWS resources?
Yep. So a single service is a single CloudFormation stack. And within there can be any number of Lambda functions, DynamoDB tables, S3 buckets, queues, whatnot. And that's all within a single service. And they'll do something like, the first service we wrote was calculating tax, right? So the functions that were related to calculating tax are all in there. If there's any S3 bucket or SSM parameters, that's all defined in the same thing. So that's one service to us.
Yeah. So you have the same definition of services that I do. If you fit it inside a CloudFormation stack and they kind of share maybe some business logic or some functionality, then it's good. And I imagine I'm just putting my definition of services against your definition of services. I imagine that, for example, if you have a Dynamo table, the only ones that can access that Dynamo table are the Lambdas or the resources within that CloudFormation stack. No one else.
I don't think we have that strict definition, but broadly, yes, that's correct. If any resources that are created within the service are usually only interacted with by that service. We have some shared things that we've broken out into Terraform stacks, because anything that isn't serverless is created by Terraform. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that, again, we're working on the interaction of those two frameworks, because the question is, how do you deploy something? Is it dependent on the Terraform stack? And then how do you coordinate the deployment there? Because one of our principles is a service should not be dependent on anything else. Yeah, you should always be able to release independently. But then what happens if you make a Terraform change? If you release a Terraform change that's required by the serverless change, you've immediately chained yourself together. So we're currently trying to figure out how to tackle that before it becomes too widespread.
Yeah, it's always hard when you start having those loops, and sometimes it's very hard to avoid. But what are you using to do your deployments? Are you using the code pipeline or have your own deployment tools?
So we use GitHub for our source control, and then we use Circle CI for our deployments and workflows. So yeah, it hooks into code deploy for canary deployments, but otherwise we just use ECS. So we have a custom task runner that we've created that runs our Terraform. So yeah, and from Circle CI, it triggers the ECS task runner, which runs our Terraform updates. And then also from Circle CI, it'll run serverless deploys. So
nice. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Hey, I always very interested on how people are doing things in reality. It's like it's always like how they put the pieces together and what kind of tools they're using, because there's so many tools
out there.
Yeah. And I think that's the nice thing, that there is a lot of them, and there is like variety, and people can choose, and they're not stuck with one tool. But I always love to hear like what kind of different tools you're using, and it's always interesting. And also for like when you're talking with others, then you know what are popular tools that people are building, because I talk a lot about code pipeline, but at the end not everybody's using it, so it's nice to know, oh yeah, Circle CI or Jenkins or whatever, like. So
yeah, it's actually interesting about how so we were looking at if we needed to replace Circle CI towards the end of last year, actually. And so we were analyzing all of these different tools from, what were we looking at? We looked at Code Pipeline, we looked at Octopus Deploy, we looked at, I forget what the other one is. I think it was GitLab. But looking at how each of them define their pipelines is quite interesting. They seem to be converging on this YAML-based configuration. Oh, GitHub Actions also we were looking at. And yeah, they all seem to be converging on using YAML to define their pipelines and having that YAML file inside the code base. So it's fascinating to see how they're kind of converging, and there's only one or two that are completely different in their approach.
But I think it's nice to have a standard way of defining things, even if they are 3 or 4 different products, because it's easy as a developer or a person implementing that to know, okay, if I do YAML, this will work.
And also to move between tools as well. It's like, oh yeah, well, I've worked with this thing. Well, I pretty much know how this one works too.
But I have to say that from Code Pipeline, I really like that you can use CDK to define the pipelines, because with CloudFormation, it's like 5 million lines of code, and with CDK, it's like 20 lines of code to make a pipeline. So YAML is nice, but TypeScript is even better. Maybe because I'm a developer, so it feels closer to me, like build things in TypeScript than in YAML. I always end up making mistakes with YAML.
Yeah, well, I wonder if that's like for all of the DevOps and operations people out there, I wonder if there's like a job security thing about, oh, well, we'll stay with YAML.
I know how to do the indentation.
Yeah. Oh, the indentation that's the one thing when I first learned YAML, it always threw me off. There was always a space right at the top where you never look.
Always. And even now, I have my Visual Studio Code set up with linting things, so it's rarely that I screw with YAML anymore. But every time I use someone else IDE, or I go to, I don't know, Cloud9 or some other IDE, it always happens that I screw it up. And I've been doing this for 5 years, and I still mess it up until today. I feel so sad. It's like, oh my God, Marcia, where is the space you left?
I mean, hopefully the time between finding the issues are getting shorter, though.
Sometimes yes, because I know that that's a common thing. Sometimes I'm just too tired, or I'm doing some live coding, and I always get very stressed when doing live coding. So it's just like So yeah, it's always something. Me and YAML, we are not good friends. But I think this was a really awesome talk, and I hope that this inspire other ops people, because I'm so tired of hearing about that, about serverless and the lack of jobs and how it will destroy our workforce. No, there's a lot of things to do, and I think there's so many exciting things to do, as you have shown us today. So don't worry. Unless you like rotating images and turning up instances, then you will be fine. Yeah. So thank you very much, Nicole, for being here today. It was super fun to have you, and I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity again. It's been a great talk, and I hope that if anyone wants to chat further about any of these things, I'm open to chatting. So yeah.
Yeah, I will leave your Twitter in the description box. Is that the place to contact you?
Yep, that will be the easiest.
Yes, and then if somebody has more questions about how you're doing things more concretely, or they want to invite you to some event, they can reach out to you, and you can chat with them. So that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This was the episode for today. I hope you like it. If you did, give a big thumbs up, and I see you in the next episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!